Tonight at 10:30, England are through to the last 16 in the World Cup. Wales are going home.
And it is Rashford.
Including a stunning free kick by Marcus Rashford.
It's just about being calm and just trying to execute what you practice in training. They don't go in often, but I'm pleased that I went in today.
Everyone's disappointed, but no, I think we're all proud of what we've achieved to get here, to do something no other a Welsh team has done to qualify. We have to look how far we've come.
I'll be live with all the latest from Doha and look ahead to the challenge that lies in store now for England.
Yes, we'll have more from Dan at the Al Rayyan Stadium in Qatar. Also tonight, the Royal College of Nursing announces strike action in parts of England, Wales and Northern Ireland for December the 15th and 20th. And a severe outbreak of bird flu means that there'll be a shortage of free-range turkeys in the shops this Christmas.
On BBC London, the Met's new dedicated hotline for the public to report corrupt officers. And the new census figures, what does it mean to be a Londoner?
Good evening, and it has been a very good evening for England's footballers in Qatar. Within the past hour, the final whistle marked a 3-0 victory over Wales. It was the final match of Group B, so England will now progress to the last 16, having come top of the group, and Wales will be returning home, having taken part in their first World Cup tournament since 1958. England bounced back from a disappointing performance against the USA, with Marcus Rashford scoring twice in the second half tonight. Well, for the latest, let's join our sports editor, Dan Rowan, in Al Rayyan.
Hugh, this was always going to be a sporting occasion to savour, the first ever meeting of two home nations at a World Cup finals. In truth, some of the jeopardy of this match had been taken away because England were already on the verge of qualifying. They only needed a point against Wales. They, on the other hand, their hopes hung by a thread. They had to win, at the very least, to stand any kind of chance. And in the event, England's performance ensured it was all quite simple.
A local derby, a long way from home. While England arrived here almost certain of continuing their stay in Qatar, Welsh hopes relied more on hope than expectation.
Come on.
But whatever the outcome and whoever was to prevail, national pride would be on the line. Familiar foes prepared to meet on this, the game's greatest stage, for the very first time. And while the defender was somehow allowed to play on despite his head injury, a few minutes later he was finally withdrawn. With Wales talisman Gareth Bale, this the ideal way to repay his manager's faith.
England running away.
England were booed off after their last match, not this time. A devastated Wales, outclassed and out of the tournament they'd waited so long to be part of. A resurgent England, top of the group and sealing qualification in style.
The second half, once we got the 2 goals, we knew that their spirit had probably gone. It's been a tough tournament for them, and I thought we kept our discipline and quality right the way to the end.
We need to realise how far we've come, how proud we all are of each other to have worked really hard to get here, and like I said, it's disappointing to go out, but we'll all walk out of that change room with our heads held high and proud of each other.
Satisfied when he go home. He could have played better than what he actually did out here.
Really fantastic. You know, for Wales even to be here, to be honest.
First time in 64 years. Isn't that incredible?
We loved it.
Wales.
I think we knew how the first half was going to go, but then we knew Wales would really have to go for it. The game would open up. We could then use our players with pace, the likes of Rashford and Foden, and it was, from there on, it was never in any doubt.
Chelsea defender Kalidou Koulibaly firing them into the last 16, where they'll face England for the first time ever. And as the current African champions, they'll pose them some test. Also through are the Netherlands, first host nation to be knocked out after losing every match. Not quite the World Cup they'd hoped for. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Well, let's have a few final thoughts then with Dan after this evening's events. Dan, what are your thoughts then on the challenges for England going ahead?
There's no doubt, Hugh, that I think sterner tests lie ahead for England. But that was the perfect response to that rather disappointing goalless draw against the United States. And I think what's so impressive about Gareth Southgate's side is the depth of talent he has at his disposal, the resources that he can bring into that side. And you have to say that, he faced criticism, didn't he, Southgate, in the build-up to this tournament after a slump in form. But he keeps getting these selections right. They are vindicated. The two big calls, Phil Foden and Marcus Rashford, both of those came off. And the problem he has now, of course, is a selection dilemma, because it would be very difficult to drop such players after the way they performed here this evening, and now playing with a freedom that the handbrake's certainly off. And I think those selections do also reinforce the difference, don't they, in the resources that are at the disposal of the respective teams as well. Wales will be bitterly disappointed, Hugh, won't they, having played so well to actually get here. You do sense that this may have been a tournament one too far, perhaps, for the likes of Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey, who have driven that side, haven't they, in recent years, to a real golden period for Welsh football, 2 European Championships and now that World Cup. And they'll have a really stern challenge, that side, you feel, to pick themselves up after this and continue that period into the future. But tonight belongs very much to England. Whether the rest of the tournament does, that remains to be seen.
Indeed. Dan, thanks very much. Dan Rowan there, our sports editor. Much more updates for you and news and analysis from Dan and colleagues on BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news. And you'll see all the detail there. And of course, you can use the BBC News app as well. Let's turn to some of the day's other main news. The Royal College of Nursing has announced which parts of the UK will be affected by strike action next month. Members will be taking action for 12 hours on December the 15th and on December the 20th. More details to be discussed with our health editor, Hugh Pym. What else have they revealed?
Well, Hugh, this will be the biggest action of its kind ever staged by the RCN, involving, they say, up to 100,000 nurses on those 2 dates. It'll play out in different ways around the UK. So let's take a look first at what's planned for England. And the RCN say that the strikes will affect 47 trusts. It won't be all trusts, because some of them didn't meet the legal threshold for strike action, and others are not being included by the RCN, though they say they will extend it in January to other hospitals if no pay talks have taken place. In Wales, it'll be all health boards, apart from Aneurin Bevan in the southeast there. Again, didn't reach the required threshold. All health organisations in Northern Ireland will take part. And the RCN are making clear strikes will affect non-urgent care. Emergency care will be preserved. In Scotland, though, there are pay talks ongoing, because the Scottish Government has made a higher offer. And in fact, one union has said it'll recommend that to members. Elsewhere, though, it seems deadlock. The RCN say they've got to go ahead with this, because ministers have refused to sit down for serious pay negotiations. Ministers speaking about England are saying the pay demands well above inflation are not affordable, and they've gone along with independent pay review recommendations. Tonight, I can tell you another union, Unison, has said it's got strike ballots in favour of action by ambulance staff at 5 trusts in England, and there may well be strikes by them before Christmas.
OK, Hugh, many thanks again. Hugh Pym, our health editor there. Now, for the first time on record, less than half the people in England and Wales identify as Christian. New data from the 2021 census also show that over the past 10 years, there's been a steep rise in the number of people who say they have no religious affiliation at all. Among those religious communities recording an increase in numbers are Muslims. Our religion editor, Ali Makboul, has more details.
We have this huge church building, which was built to hold, I believe, 700 people originally, 134 years ago. Now it would be about 20 adults, 5 children on a Sunday usually.
Father Ian's recently seen another church across town close. But even when he started here 14 years ago, he had questions about whether it was viable to carry on.
When I first came here, I was walking down the street outside, and a man passing by said to me, "You're flogging a dead horse around here, mate." But I think we keep going. We have hope in God, and if God wants us here, then we'll continue.
But the decline is borne out in the data. Well, when the question was first asked in the census of 2001, around 72% of people defined themselves as Christian, but that is now down to around 46%. There has been a modest rise in the number of people who say they belong to all major non-Christian faiths, but the biggest increase by far is in the number of people who say they have no religion. now a figure of more than 37% of people in England and Wales.
If you dig down into the category of no religion, it's an umbrella term for a huge variety of positions. So some of those will be atheist, a lot will be agnostic, they'll just say, I don't really know. And some will be spiritual and be doing spiritual things, but they don't want to identify with a particular religion, and certainly not with institutional religion.
Muslims are now up to around 6.5% of the population. The girls at this football club in Birmingham embracing that part of their identity.
Our parents' generation, they kind of accepted a lot of things, kind of like surviving. The next generation, they're starting to kind of show that you can be British, you can be Muslim, you can have it all.
What's certain is the way people here define themselves and their faith, or lack of it, continues to evolve rapidly. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in Birmingham.
The government has abandoned measures that would have forced big tech companies to remove harmful but nonetheless legal content. Campaigners say the online safety bill, which will regulate what is seen online, has been watered down. Now, the new law would make it a criminal offence for individuals to publish and share certain types of pornography and content which encourages self-harm or suicide. Social media firms could be fined if they fail to stop children using their platforms if they're too young. And platforms should make it possible for adult users to be able to block more types of material that they don't want to see. Our political editor, Chris Mason, joins us now. And Chris, tell us a little more about what these changes mean.
What they mean is a significant intervention into the whole business of the extent to which the online world is regulated, and there are laws underpinning it. And it's the main reason why this has taken so long for the government to try to do something about it. It's now set itself a deadline of the summer, the end of this parliamentary session, where there is a reboot and then the government comes along with a whole new set of proposed laws. If they don't get this sorted by then, they are back to square one, and in that time it needs to go back before the Commons on Monday, then be scrutinised by MPs, and then go to the House of Lords. And there are senior figures who think that it might get bogged down there. So why has this taken so long? Because it is so complicated. You have a rapidly evolving online world commanded by these giant international companies, and then you have, if you like, trade-offs between some giant fundamentals. So you have freedom of expression. To what extent is it legitimate for limitations on that online to be put in place? What is harm? Who defines it, and how do you measure it? What should be legal and what should be illegal? These are big, weighty concepts around which there are huge ongoing arguments. And then you have a kind of bigger overarching question, really, which is one of national lawmaking beginning to intervene on these international online companies. And we're going to see this over and over again in the coming years and in the coming decades. It's not easy, it is very keenly fought over, and this is just the start.
Chris, many thanks again for the analysis there. Chris Mason, our political editor. A man has been arrested in Gloucestershire in connection with the deaths of at least 27 people who drowned trying to cross the English Channel in a small vessel in November of last year. Harim Ahmed Akubaka is accused of involvement with an organised crime group which conspired to bring the migrants to the UK in a small boat. He's due to appear before Westminster magistrates tomorrow, where he'll face extradition proceedings to France. In the past few minutes, the founder of the right-wing Oath Keepers militia group in the US has been convicted in relation to last year's attack on the US Capitol building in Washington, D.C. He and 4 other people were accused of using force to try to block Congress from certifying the victory by President Biden in the presidential election. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is outside the court for us now. Tell us more about what's been going on, Sarah.
Well, so the far-right extremist group, the Oath Keepers, 2 of them have been found guilty of seditious conspiracy, including Stuart Rhodes, who is the leader of that group. Now, that's a very unusual charge that dates all the way back to the Civil War era in America. It's also a very serious charge because it comes with up to 20 years in jail. Now, there were 5 Oath Keepers in all on trial, and they were all convicted of some charges, including things like obstruction or conspiracy to obstruct. Stuart Rhodes, the group's leader, he didn't actually go into the Capitol building on January the 6th, but the jury clearly were convinced that he had plotted in advance to use violence to stop the lawful transfer of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. They saw text messages he sent which talked of things like the need to rise up in insurrection. And this verdict will be very carefully watched, not just for what it means for the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys who are going on trial soon as well, but what it could mean for Donald Trump, because the Justice Department is still considering whether to prosecute him for his part in the January 6th riot. And a special counsel has now been appointed here in Washington to look into whether or not Donald Trump himself should be put on trial.
Sarah, many thanks. Once again, Sarah Smith, our North America editor. China's ambassador to the UK was summoned to the Foreign Office today to respond to the arrest and beating of a BBC camera journalist while he was covering demonstrations in Shanghai. Ed Lawrence was held for several hours on Sunday. A heavy police presence on the streets of major cities has prevented really further unrest. There's growing concern about how the authorities have clamped down on recent protests against the strict COVID measures imposed by the government. Our analysis editor, Ros Atkins, has been investigating.
There's a crackdown taking place in China. Police are being deployed in many cities because at the weekend, widespread protests erupted over strict COVID rules.
I think we should go back to normal. We should go back to normal lives.
That was in Beijing. This footage is Shanghai. It was filmed by the BBC's Edward Lawrence, who later was beaten by police and held for several hours.
Call the consulate now.
There were also protests in Chengdu, Xi'an, Wuhan and Urumqi, where the first protest was seen. And there have been rare calls for the president to stand down. These protesters are saying, down with the Chinese Communist Party, down with Xi Jinping. Now, localised protests aren't uncommon in China. Widespread ones are. But as the world has opened up after the pandemic, mass testing, quarantines and lockdowns are all still used in China. And when 10 people died in a fire in Urumqi last week, some said lockdown rules had slowed the response. Not that the government accepts this.
Forces with ulterior motives have used social media to link the fire to the zero COVID policy, but the local government has combated these rumours and smears.
The Chinese state is certainly seeking to exert control online. The social media platform Weibo has removed nearly all footage of the protests. The authorities also want to stop the footage ever getting online. This video, also from the BBC's Edward Lawrence, shows a woman being forced to delete photos.
We're getting reports of police using cell phone data, for example, to track people who are at protests. We're starting to see them use that system to exercise control.
The surveillance and censorship doesn't stop there. White pieces of paper have become a symbol of the protests, and online searches for them are being restricted. And while the government restricts the protesters, its allies are getting their message out. Nationalist accounts on Weibo are speculating that the discontent is being instigated by foreign forces. There's no publicly available evidence of that. There is, though, evidence that COVID is spreading. Zero COVID has kept numbers low in China, but as you can see, they're rising now. And on zero COVID, there's no end in sight.
This seems to be indefinite, and that sense of no hope and hopelessness is what's driving the current protest.
The government censors appear mindful of this. Chinese state media is not mentioning the protests, and on coverage of the World Cup, as the BBC's Stephen McDonnell notes, it's being edited so Chinese viewers don't see thousands of fans without masks. Zero COVID has meant the Chinese state constraining the virus and its own people. And as COVID spreads and protesters call for change, the government continues its efforts to control both. That
was Ros Atkins there, our analysis editor. Now, more than 1 million turkeys have already been culled in the UK in the past 2 months because of a severe outbreak of bird flu. Now, one of the UK's biggest turkey suppliers has told a parliamentary committee that there will be a severe shortage of free-range turkeys for Christmas this year. Our rural affairs correspondent Claire Marshall has the story.
These are scenes of Christmas past. This year in England, no turkeys are being reared outdoors. Avian flu is ripping through wild and captive bird populations. This is the new reality. All poultry have been kept inside since the start of November. It's such a crisis that today those affected spoke out.
It was traumatic, come October the 1st, end of September actually. We've seen an outbreak in the UK like we have never seen before. We've had more outbreaks in the past month than we have in the entirety of last year, so it's been absolutely devastating through East Anglia.
Here in Bath, there's one local butcher who's had to work really hard to keep the Christmas spirit going for his customers.
So this is obviously a stuffed turkey crown.
This year, Peter Milton's providing around 700 birds for Christmas dinner. Avian flu has given him sleepless nights, but he's taken precautions.
I've made sure that the turkeys, the geese, the ducks and everything were coming from different suppliers, just in case were something to happen to one, then we could, obviously there's alternatives available. I know of other butchers who have had to, announce to all of their customers that no turkeys this year, no geese, no ducks and things like that, and that's not a route we obviously want to go down.
Thank you, good afternoon.
Details of the crisis were heard in the Commons today. The chief vet making it clear just how important it is to bring the disease under control.
The risk remains very low, but if you left and didn't control the infection and it was passing through lots of birds and lots of human contact, then that's where you get the risk of the virus changing more quickly and creating a human outbreak.
Farmers say they need better compensation, or for some businesses, this could be their last Christmas. Claire Marshall, BBC News.
A little more then on the main story. Clash of the two home nations, England and Wales in Qatar this evening. Well, this was the scene in Bristol, in the fan zone, where the England fans were having a great time, unlike some of us Wales fans during the evening. Our correspondent Dan Johnson watched the match with lots of them.
Even under limited pressure, watching England can be a nervy experience.
Yeah, it'll come,
But Martin was staying confident.
Any second now, I can feel it in my waters.
Even though the first half was all near misses.
Oh! My waters have been a couple of inches off lately.
But what's the cliche? A game of two halves. And it didn't take long to turn. Spot the only Wales fan at the front. Ben was still celebrating England's first goal when this happened.
Very happy, very happy.
Slightly more relaxed, but it was in the bag anyway. I mean, you can see what it's doing to everyone here. Football's coming home. Come on!
2 was comfortable, but 3, that was the real crowd pleaser.
Well, like, the atmosphere here has been absolutely unreal.
I love football, and that's one of the best games I've seen ever played.
First half, iffy. Second half, brilliant.
I haven't a clue about football, but the kids are loving it, so we're loving it.
So Martin, what are your full-time reflections? Never mind, all over. England through. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Bristol.
Well, after all that uncontrolled jubilation, it was a different story, obviously, for Wales. A bit of a disappointing night, I think it's fair to say. World Cup dream is over for this time. But for many of those watching in Qatar and cheering them on in Wales, there was definitely a sense of pride in what's been achieved, as Thomas Morgan tells us.
This morning, a call to arms from perhaps Wales's youngest, most passionate fan.
The last time I was back in the World Cup was back in 1958, and it's glad to have it back in. But if we do win, we'll we might be onto the knockout rounds, and that'll make history for all of Wales. So come on! Come
As the anthem rung out across the fan zone this evening, everyone across the country hoping, wishing this wasn't the last time they'd be singing Hen Wlad Fy Nhadau in this World Cup. The bucket hats and buckets of beer were out in force once again for a showdown with the old enemy. Excitement, passion, but apprehension and anxiety in the air. No Red Wolf fan wanted a must-win match against England, but alas it was. Yet many still remained optimistic.
It's more like of a drive because it's England. We have to beat England just because it's England. We need to play better than we did last week. We need to score more goals, be more attacking.
All the boys are really disappointed after the game, so I think they'll put up a good fight to try and prove something out.
Backs against the wall in Qatar, tension at home. A momentous defensive effort, level at half-time, meaning there was still a chance.
The atmosphere here is brilliant, like it's fantastic here, but yeah, come on Wales, like everyone here is behind Wales, we all believe in Wales.
We're very stressed, but...
You're very stressed?
Yes, but it's fine, we believe, we've got the belief.
Although the support was unwavering, deafening at times, on the pitch the game began to fall apart as the goals flowed in from England.
Even a few goals down, the fans are still as vocal and passionate as ever until the very end.
There was still a sense of pride and appreciation tonight, despite the result.
Never seen an occasion, we've never been in the World Cup since I've been alive, and there were some young kids sat by us, and I said to them, it's disappointing we've lost, but you've done how lucky you are.
Disappointment but admiration, as a golden generation of Welsh football has perhaps come to an end. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Swansea.
Well, the time is nearly 11 o'clock, and Chris is here with the weather. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Hugh. Well, we've had some big contrasts away from the football field between England and Wales, actually, weather-wise today. Across England, there was a lot of low cloud. That kept things pretty misty and cool, just 3 degrees, where that lingered into the afternoon. Contrast that with West Wales, where we saw temperatures into double figures. It was actually quite a mild day. But there's a much more general change in our weather pattern taking place over the next week or so. We're going to lose the Atlantic influence. And what's going to happen into next week is going to build a big area of high pressure up here, Greenland, a big blocking area of high pressure. What that does, next week, towards the end of the week, we're going to get these cold northerly winds dragging in some much colder polar air. Might even be cold enough for some of you to see some snowfall, particularly across the hills of northern Scotland. But that's 7 to 10 days off. For the time being, it's fog that's cause for concern at the moment, with things turning really quite murky across northeast England and central belt of Scotland, where visibility has already dropped down to 100 metres. So take it easy if you're planning a road trip overnight tonight. Temperatures for many frost-free, but where we keep the clearest skies, northern Scotland, temperatures probably getting down to about -5, -6, one of the coldest nights of our autumn. Now tomorrow, this low cloud, the mist and the fog might well loiter across eastern areas well into the afternoon. Where that happens, temperatures struggle just 4 or 5 degrees. Many western areas will brighten up, but in Northern Ireland, we'll start to see thicker cloud moving in through the afternoon with some spots of rain. But this is actually going to be one of the mildest parts of the country. Now on into Thursday's weather forecast. Again, mist and fog could be an issue first thing in the morning. Otherwise, we've got some thicker cloud in Scotland, bringing outbreaks of rain. The wettest weather will be for Orkney and Shetland. The rain across the mainland, just light and patchy, really. Temperature-wise, England and Wales, around about 8 to 10 degrees. Milder for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's going to turn cooler through the weekend and colder still into next week, Hugh.
OK, Chris, many thanks once again. And that's BBC News at 10 on the 29th of November. Usual reminder, plenty of updates, plenty of analysis online, bbc.co.uk/news. But of course, now on BBC One, we have our colleagues in the nations and regions standing by a bit later than usual, with apologies, with the news where you are. But from all of us here, thanks for watching and good night.